Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So we're going to talk about writing today. But I think we're going to open with, so there's many different kinds, and as a good way to introduce, what is the right tone and how do you identify your audience? What is appropriate? What is the appropriate level of formality? Are you going to still do the elevator pitch?
Yeah, I think that...
Okay. I think we need a volunteer, right?
The biggest thing in written communication or any communication of any kind is to know who your audience is, right? And to be able to cater what you're saying to that audience. Because anytime something is communicated, it's very difficult to get it from here out to somebody else. And it happens in different mediums, like in speaking, the way I am right now. But in written language, it's even different, because in written language, it's permanent, right? After I say something, you can't go back and hear it again. After it's written, it's already out there. So there's kind of a spectrum of formality. We could think of it that way. There's, on the one side, writing which is, we could say, too casual. And on another side, there's writing which we could say is almost pompous or too complex. So what would be good examples of text that is too casual? Who's got their cell phone with them? Can I use somebody's cell phone? Teddy? Is there an appropriate text conversation on there I can see?
That should all be good.
So think about the way we text each other, right? Do you address somebody? Do you say, "Hi, this is Braden. Hi, this is my name," when you text somebody? Let's see. Do you remember where it is? Yes. Don't wait on me. Okay, well, we're drinking a glass of wine. I'm trying to get out. It's okay, I'm not mad or anything. I'm packing up now. Fourth. And Jesse. Mom says you deserve hard alcohol, LOL. I said appropriate. But you get a sense of what I mean, right? We text each other. We use Twitter. We use different forms of text in different ways. And so I've experienced, just as a teacher, times when students will come up to me and they'll actually use text talk, if you think of it that way. So they won't introduce themselves. They won't even call attention to the fact that they want to talk. I'll be doing something else, and they'll just kind of wander up. And so for the assignment, I was wondering if this part was due or this was due, and it's like, whoa, what's your name? What are you at? Why are you asking me a question? What is the question about? And so it takes a level of sort of formality. So on the one side, it can be way, way too casual. You would never write a letter to someone. You would never write a cover letter in the way that you would write a text message, right? And so what would be the other side of it? You don't want to be too complex. It still needs to be understandable and digestible for people. So I want another participant now. Somebody who will volunteer to take part in something. As you're all leaping at the chance. For
Ren.
us?
I'm going to volunteer Ren.
Who? Ren?
Yeah.
Ren's been volunteered. So this is sometimes, you ever heard of the elevator? The elevator scenario where you have to make a pitch in an elevator? So that's one reason, but I've always thought of it as like a moving thing as well, where you can see the time frame at the end. So if you and I were to go from here and walk to the end of the room, you'd have to be able to say something to me in that time that is clear and gets the point across. So think of me as like your dream future employer. Like, who would that be?
Tell you, for sure. Tell you who is the dream
Okay.
employer.
Okay, so you spot me
Okay.
across the room.
Right.
Now you're going to come up, you see me walking, you're going to come up and sort of dovetail with me, we're going to walk.
Okay.
And you have until the end of the door to, let's just take a different scenario. Did you eat lunch today?
Yes.
Okay.
Breakfast.
Breakfast or lunch?
Well, breakfast.
Okay, so you have till the end of the room to persuade me that I should eat the exact same thing you ate.
Okay.
How's that?
All right.
Jennifer, can you just move the chair a little bit? Okay. Okay, so I'm walking.
So I went to the Mint Plaza.
So first of all, you haven't even introduced yourself, right? So I don't even know who you are right away. I'm gonna. Okay, so I'm walking.
Hey there, my name is Ren. I actually went to the Mint Plaza today, had a Belgian waffle with an iced coffee, New Orleans style, right outside, very beautiful.
Okay, that's great, right? That's good. So who he is, where he went, what it was, and that it was good. But you notice he doesn't go into any flowery language or get too complex about what all the ingredients were, how much it cost, where he sat, what the weather was like outside, unnecessary things that aren't needed. So you can come off as being too complex sometimes. And sometimes by doing that, you come off as trying to look as if you're making yourself more credible than you actually are, which is pompous, and you don't want that. So I think it's important to always realize where you want to fall on that spectrum when you're thinking about your audience. Above all, you want to be clear and direct.
Mm-hmm. So to that, so in some ways, so today we're talking about writing skills, but the same kind of principle of how you filter information applies to both how you write your resume and your cover letter, as well as what just happened, right? So in other words, that was probably like 15 seconds maybe, right? So it's similar. So in other words, when you write a cover letter in your resume, it's dense, right? It's what you did for the last 4 or 5 years. But the audience, the person who receives it, they're not going to spend the time to sit down and read through it carefully, right? So if you make the information confusing, hard to find, hard to follow, guess what happens to it, right? They're moving on to the next because what judgment did they just make of you? Right? So you have a discrete set of information with certain things to emphasize, and in a few seconds, right, that person, the reader, the audience, they weren't able to discern that. What did this person just, so I'm reading that, I'm HR and I'm the first filter, right? I may not even be an architect if it's a large firm, right? So I'm trying to glance through to see if this is worth passing on to somebody who has the hiring power or not. And I can't figure out, how long this person worked at a certain place, what are the kinds of experiences, what are the skill sets and the strengths that they're trying to say, right? If I don't understand that in a few seconds, I'm going to deem you unfit for the job, right? So not worth passing on, right? So that kind of filter you have to apply. So including the verbal pitch, the elevator pitch, right? So in other words, if you have 30 seconds. And in this case, it was about convincing somebody to order the same item off the menu. But let's say it was your job, right? Let's say that this was somebody who potentially could give you your internship or a job, right? And you had to somehow, in that brief 30 seconds, introduce who you are, what you want from them, and why they should give you this opportunity, right? So you don't have time. You don't have the luxury of delving into all of the things that you want to tell them. You have to think about what are the most important and relevant and clear pieces of information that I can convey, right? So written communication. So how formal? So that's what the spectrum on the board is. So the appropriate level of formality for what we are doing is it's direct. Right? So meaning you're not going around and around to make a point. You're not making the point again. It's very, very direct, as much as you can, and clear. Right? So think of this word crisp. Like when you're writing a business letter, cover letter, resume, the sensation, the kind of impression that you get, that you want to give, is that it should be crisp. Right? Not languid, not superfluous, not redundant. It should be crisp. And why is it so important? Why is written communication so important? So I hope you've realized by now, where you are in the program, that there's a piece of, even within the studio class, right? Not across the arcs of the program. There's so Braden's arc, right? There's definitely ways to research, ways to write, ways to express your thought in written form and verbally. But even within a design studio setting, right? Did you always have to write something, a text, as part of a drawing? Or as part of a standalone written assignment, right? Would you say that writing skills, written communication skills is emphasized regardless of which class you're in, right? Yeah? Do you think it'll stop? Let's say that's just for school because we have to grade you and it happens to be a course learning outcome that we've decided for the program, and once you get your degree, nobody's going to grade you anymore. I don't have to worry about that. I can just draw or model or design. No, right? Because so imagine a scenario where, so let's say that you're in a firm, you're in an office. How does the design happen, on a daily basis and over an extended course of time? Who's involved in initiating the project? Who's involved? Who do you need to have in place for a project to even begin? Say again? Yeah, client, right? You need a client, And do you need to talk to this person? First, you have to, right, if you don't already have the commission, you have to convince them that you're the right person for the job, right? And they may not know how to read floor plans, they may not know how to, there may not be a visual communicator, right? So you have to speak to them verbally and in written communication, right? So let's say, so now the client is secured, who else gets involved? Yes, and engineers first, right? Engineers and consultants. So a project of a certain scale, but even the very small ones, you're usually not the only person who, you need to rely on expertise of other people, right? To make it real, right? So that it could be built. And those people have to understand what you're thinking. Otherwise they're gonna do something, not what you want, right? And then eventually builders. You have to be able to communicate to builders. Right? So so from day one all the way to even after construction, in post-occupancy, you have to have your, the need for you to communicate verbally and in written form to people who may or may not be in the profession, right? About what you have in mind, about your concept, about your intent for the detail. It doesn't end, right? So much so that, and I think an email is going out if it hasn't already. Did you guys get an email yet about this reading, the PDF? Yes, right? So much so that, so today, this context, we're only talking about, professional communication, right? About, specifically about cover letters and resume. But that article, the reading, it actually talks about the role of written communication, the power of words, to help you develop as a designer, right? It enters into the design process. It's not just about getting jobs, right? So it's really important. And the bar is really high, especially for the cover letters and resumes, right? So I'm sure every single instructor has nagged you about typos, right? Grammar errors, right? We do all kinds of things. We say we'll mark you down, we'll make you redo it, right? So we really care, right? So I'm going to share this one out. So how many spelling or grammar mistake does it take for that HR person, right, the mailroom person, right? It didn't even get to the person who's making the decision for this person to say, well, this goes in this pile, not in that pile. But one. All you need is one. They see one typo, one spelling error, and doesn't cut it, right? But what about, we're all people, we make errors, why is the bar set so high, especially for cover letters and resumes? Why? I mean, right, so we've all made mistakes, so even if you proofread it, dozen times, you've done everything that you were asked to do, and there might still be an error, right? We're only human. Why is it so critical?
Because it's something that should be very detail-oriented. Like, if you made one spelling mistake, you obviously never read this over. You just kind of like typed it and finished it.
Right. So it's detail-oriented. So in other words, whether it's fair or unfair, the first piece of written communication in the form of the cover letter and the resume, and maybe the email that those things are attached to, possibly, those things are held. You're being judged. You're making your first impression. And the person who's at the receiving end of this is looking at this, and they're not giving you the benefit of the doubt because that's the expectation that is already set. And that's not just our profession, that's across the board. But in our profession, there's also, we need people who pay attention to detail, right? Because that applies to what we do. As well as they're looking for, so knowing that that's the expectation, have they bothered to put in the time, right? Have they put in enough care, right, to make sure that there are no spelling errors and grammatical errors? And if they find one, that's what they don't care, they haven't put in the time, or they don't understand what the stakes are, right? So those kinds of people have no place in our firm. And it extends into, they're also, so let's say it makes the cut and it goes to the person, the architect who's actually making the hiring decision. They're looking at it to see, okay, if I hire this person, and I need this person to eventually communicate with the client, the engineer, the consultant, maybe the city, right? So other stakeholders, the participants in the project team. Can I trust this person to communicate to them on behalf of my firm without embarrassing themselves and myself, right? So it's really important. The bar is much, 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 much higher
There's different
Yeah.
pitfalls you can fall into depending on the audience of the writing, right? So, architects write for other forms than just the stuff that we're talking about right now. There's specifications that have to be written. And if that's not accurate, if that's not clear, then that will have effects in the design, right? Mistakes will be made. And it's the fault of the person who was writing it by not being clear enough to make sure the person on the other end could interpret it. That's just in the design world. In the form of resumes and cover letters, it's your credibility that's at stake, right? It's just like what you saw last week with branding and some of the visual material. You are how you are perceived. It's not how you think you are. You are how you are perceived. And so you have to try to deal with that as much as you can in your writing. I had an example I have an example from my own experience from just a couple weeks ago. An editor, a very high-level editor at a publishing company, I won't tell you the name of the publisher, sent me an email and asked me if I was interested in writing a book proposal to do a book. And I thought, well, that's great. I said, Mr. Engel. And then the very first word of the body of the text was spelled wrong. Instead of may I ask you, it said nay, I ask you, with an N. Sort of like old English, nay, I ask you. And it was like, and so immediately, and this is from who? This isn't a low-level kind of copy, person. This is like an editor-in-chief, right? And so immediately, now the credibility of that person, in my mind, whether it's justifiable or not, goes down quite a bit. And that's just a different scenario. I knew an architect once who was presenting a project to a school board for a new elementary school. So big boards designed for a new elementary school. There was different playground space, public space, private space, and they misspelled public on the board for the children's school, the big open area. So it didn't say public space, it said pubic space. Right? So that ain't good, is it? That's one example of really, really hitting the wrong note, especially for an elementary school.
Yeah.
And so it's unfortunate, right? Because you've lost the job immediately. It's not just losing the job, it's not just about the money, but it's about your credibility, and that'll
it's your
affect
reputation.
that'll affect them for years into the future.
So if that's clear, right? So there's no room for error in this, right? Whether it's fair or unfair, there's no room for error. So resume, so I wanted to quickly touch on the difference between, so there are two words, resume and CV. It depends on which country you're in and who you're speaking to. But for the most part, for what you're doing, for finding an internship in an architecture office, what we mean is resume, which is a shorter document. So it means summary in French. And so as you build more experience, right, but even so, with the level of experience that you have, you tailor it, right, based on which firm you're applying it to. Right, so you have an ability to emphasize certain experiences or responsibilities you've had over others, right? So you tailor it. So if you have 25 years of experience, you could do 2 pages, right? But for where you are, it should not exceed a page, right? So it's 1 page, 1 side, right? So a CV. So Braden is used to, in the context of, because he used it interchangeably in England, right? So it's just a different kind of a convention. But in the US, when we say a CV, it's a longer document. It's usually within the academic circles, where you go into much more detail and elaborate the kinds of papers you publish and the kinds of research that you're doing, right? So it's more of an extended summary. So even in our country, in the U.S., you'll see people, you use resume and CV interchangeably, but for a job in an architecture office, what you're sending them is the shorter version, the 1-page document, whether they call it, CV or resume. Right?
Is anybody's resume that they brought here today more than a page?
Good. So 7 seconds. 5 to 7 seconds, but I'm adding, so this comes from this graphic, right? So average time spent looking at a CV resume is 5 to 7 seconds.
Does that seem fair?
That's the first cut, right? If it looks good within that first viewing, the 7 seconds, it gets forwarded, right? If it doesn't, it does not get forwarded. So what I'd like to do, this really is true. This isn't some random, a piece of data that was pulled.
I want to add to to the 7 seconds, people are looking for something.
Yeah.
You know, Karen and I do this every semester. We're looking for something. We have an idea what we're looking for. So it isn't just 7 seconds to make a huge decision about whether there's ever a possibility to ever hire this person. Usually people are thinking with a particular job again. So keep that in mind. So there's going to be things that are talking about. It's a filter system. So if you're applying for an entry-level job, you know, they're probably going to be looking at, are you really entry-level? You know, are you saying, are you truly entry-level? Or did your resume show up in the wrong time? So think of that 7 seconds as, it's 7 seconds because they're looking for a confirmation of an idea that they have in their head about certain facts that are going to line up with that particular search.
It's a good point. It's not an essay or a novel, right? So they're not just going to start at the top and go line by line. It's a bigger view, the way you look at it, for things to pop.
So what we'd like to do is actually, we'll look at an example up on the screen, and we'll spend 7 seconds. We'll time it. We'll spend 7 seconds as a group, and see what you can actually absorb within that time, right? And then we'll break up. We'll pair up, and then we'll swap your CVs, your resumes, and do the exercise again. So in other words, your own resume, you wrote it, you know, it's your life, right? So it's much more familiar. There's no context that you have to try to determine. But when you swap it, right, so if you don't know, and especially, I think at this point, your experiences are varied enough. They're not always within the field. So we'll see how much information is actually conveyed within 7 seconds. Okay. So for the one to do as a group, let's use this one. Okay, clock's ticking. 1 second. I'll give you a 6 second. That's it, 7 seconds. Right? So it's pretty complex. So in other words, you know, this goes back to what Jennifer was saying. We're not starting at the top and reading line by line, right? This is why we have an advantage, because we're trained to communicate visually, that we can design the resume so that people can glance through the information very quickly, right? So we can establish hierarchies, emphasis, right? So that there's layers. So the first layer are, you know, what is done here, right? And so there are these bold texts that are kind of the main trunk of the information, and then under each there's detail, right? And so let's switch places, or pair up, and then let's switch resumes, right?
Let's try to pair up with people that you don't know very well.
Yeah.
That you haven't had any class with. So some of the younger with the older. Because then what we want you to do is spend 7 seconds with the other person's resume and write down, put yourself in the employer's shoes. Write down what you know about that person from those 7 seconds on the resume. And just that. And then trade and do the same for the other person.
So if you're ready, I'll time it for you guys. Ready? Okay, go.
2, 3, 4.
That's it.
7 seconds is over. Can you put it aside now, and can you write down what you know of that person? Some of you are writing whole paragraphs. You must have figured quite a bit out from those 7 seconds. Okay, if you've done that already, then take the other. So you both wrote each other's, right? Should we do one more round?
Let's see what this
see what
is.
they
Yeah.
said?
So give your notes to the person, the author of the resume. And let's see. So after this, if we need to make any tweaks. So can we have a couple of people who read out loud the notes and then compare it to what you think was accurate or inaccurate or incomplete? Maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got that she has interned before.
Mhm.
She's a student, and she volunteered for Habitat for Humanity.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty good. Do you feel like those were the three pieces of information, right? And were those 3 pieces the most important that you wanted to get across?
In a way, yeah.
Yeah. What else? Is there another layer or detail or another piece?
I don't know, maybe more of like my skills or something.
So more of who you are as a person,
Yeah.
not just what you've done.
Yeah.
Great. Can we do another example? Somebody read out loud and compare it for accuracy and completeness? Yeah.
Sure. I got that he was a student with no employment history and some extracurriculars.
Okay.
And it was a set of skills.
Okay. And whose was that? Can you comment to that, Michael?
There's way more to it. But I guess, yeah, I got the big idea.
We got that. So
Well, let's go back to those 3 though. A student, what else?
Student, no employment history, extracurriculars, and then a set of skills.
Do you know what kind of student?
Bachelor of architecture.
So that came through.
Yeah.
At least that's there.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Not just any student.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right.
All right.
But a good student who is passionate, medium. I guess you guys are all good students if you're here.
Yeah, but do any of the qualifiers come
Yeah.
through, right?
Yeah, so the extracurriculars kind of reinforce the idea that he could be a good student because he seemed involved within the university. Those points were listed under extracurriculars.
Right. So Michael, let's say that Blake, is the door to your dream summer internship, right? And what would you like for him to have discerned, right? So in other words, you're introducing yourself on paper, through this list of things that you've done, right? So beyond just kind of the factual information, that I'm a student and so forth, what is the qualitative information that you would have liked to have communicated?
More of the skills, a little more of the technical, like what I actually do in school versus just like, I think just the idea of going to school is kind of pretty broad. So kind of being a little more specific as to, I guess, the way I work.
So more individualized. So in other words, so we're all students at the same program here, but we all work in different ways. So you want that individualization to have come across, right? These are really good comments. So should we do one more round?
Sure.
This one. So this time, right? So we'll do it one more time. So pair with somebody else. So this time you're actually going to intentionally look for the qualitative information. So what kind of a student? What are their interests? What are their passions? Why are they applying for this job?
Switch with somebody else.
Right? You're looking for their strengths.
So, you know, it's like that.
Okay, you're looking for all the qualitative information.
Okay, ready? Go.
Go. So fast.
Yeah, time's up.
All right.
So
Write that down.
Yeah. So we have a couple of volunteers to share your notes.
Actually, my first reaction was I was unsettled because there was like a big paragraph on the resume. So initially I was like, whoa, a lot of words. So that was my first reaction. Then there were diagrams that weren't easily understood immediately. So I was like graphically inclined, but it wasn't just coming across clearly. And I saw that there was some extracurricular involvement, habitat for humanity. But those were my first
Impressions. And who is this?
instincts.
Who is this?
Ren.
This right here. So what do you think, Ren? Was that your intent, your goal for what you want to
No.
communicate first?
No, so I definitely agree it needs to be more simpler.
Uh-huh.
The text format, I think it's a little too much in the text.
Yeah.
And,
So what are some qualitative strengths that you have, like things that you feel passionate about that you wanted to communicate?
sustainability. I guess innovation. I guess sustainability, innovation, and but also in a playful manner type of attitude. I guess. In terms of like the work
Okay. Okay. So you love working, you love architecture and you have fun
Yes.
doing it. Great. And then can we have one other volunteer to read their notes?
All right, so I looked at John's resume. What else I would get in 7 seconds was his educational background at the academy, some of his skills he's acquired in AutoCAD, Revit, Adobe, as well as some work experience. I worked for CC Interior and I did some sort of consulting job, and that's all else I would get in 7 seconds.
So, John, is this you? Yeah. Okay, so does it bear with what was important to you to communicate?
Yeah.
Anything else where he got it? So
The work experience, I guess, and what I can do, I guess. Yeah.
I guess. So we'll look at some do's and don'ts on the screen together, right? And so we'll try to be more specific in what we mean, right? So, so Ren's comments and then John's, and then a lot of you are focused on your skills, right? Because we all know that if you don't have the computer skills, that you won't get a job because then you can't, produce and be productive, right? So we'll talk about that too, right? So it's important to list them. It's important to communicate what you know how to do, but you want to do it in a context that where you're looking at your career, right? This as the beginning of your career, not as a temp summer job that you're just doing to make a buck.
And I think it is all about the context of somebody sitting down to read it, and they're going to spend 5 to 7 seconds. It's not that much different than what you do in studio all the time. You're designing spaces for certain things to happen. You're designing experiences. Think of your CV that way. You have to be able to put yourself in that person's shoes. So, of course, there's a time and a place to write paragraphs, right? To see a paragraph is not always an alarming thing. If I'm opening up an essay, if I want to read something like that, I'm expecting paragraphs. But if I'm a person that's sitting down to read a resume, I'm probably not expecting paragraphs. I'm not even going to want to read it.
Right.
So it's all about the context of the situation.
Right. So here's an example of a cover letter. We'll start with the cover letter, right? So first of all, expect to go through many, many drafts because it's such an important element, right? It's a critical piece in making your first impression, right? So this isn't like one of dozen assignments. This is the first threshold, right? And either you cross it or you don't, right? And it really rests on this. So we asked everybody to follow this format, right? So what you found out about the firm and how your interests, the things that you care about, align with the firm's research, and then the things that you're attaching to as evidence that support your claim, as well as how you intend to follow up, right? So in this cover letter, and this is an example of a pretty good cover letter, right? It's well formatted, it's pretty concise, and I don't know if we can't really, right? So it begins with an introduction, right? And it begins with, this was through a context. So it introduces the person who made the introduction, right? They're intermediate. And then, so the last sentence of the first paragraph closes with I would say the single most thing that this candidate wants to get across, his strength, his best strength, that he wants the reader to understand. And then, so the comments in red, it's really more to make the language concise and clear. Meaning, so a lot of times, not just for this, but any writing assignment, for your studio, for history theory classes, you have an intent, like you have something, an idea, like that hasn't yet been formed into words, that have been, constructed into a sentence. You have an idea. And then the way it comes out on the paper, there isn't always a connection. There's usually a disconnect the first time you write something, right? Because you're trying to recall vocabulary, phrases, how do I structure this? So then it's usually a really good idea, it's a really helpful exercise to actually read out loud to yourself, or have somebody read it, or have it in front of you, and try to verbally explain what you meant to say, right? And then, so oftentimes your audience, your friend will say, I understand what you told me just now, that makes a lot more sense, but I didn't get that in what you wrote, right? So that's your first step in kind of trying to identify where's the disconnect, where am I not communicating clearly, right? So the intent here is, so when you're looking for a job, when you're applying for a job, this is not, you don't want a CAD monkey position. Do we all know what a CAD monkey is? We don't want that. We understand that we may
Can
need
you demonstrate?
We understand that, so a large part of it, entry-level job, a large portion of it might happen there because that's where you're the most productive. But we're not applying to this job, for just the 3 months or the 6 weeks, right? So we are looking at this as an entry point for a much longer arc, right? This is the beginning of your career. And in the beginning, you're trying out different kinds of work, different kinds of firms. But as you do that, you're refining more and more what it is that you're trying to narrow it down, right, to the kinds of work and the kinds of places that you want to work, right? And guess what? The person who's hiring you, they're looking at you the same way, right? So if they needed a CAD monkey and they're short on time, they go to a temp agency, right? So they're only looking for, can this person use Revit? That's all they care. Right? So they come in on a 6-month credit contract, 3-month contract, whatever the duration the project requires, because they're short-staffed and they can't make the permanent hire quick enough. And can you imagine the kinds of differences and the responsibilities that the temp person will be given as opposed to a full-time permanent hire? Right? Can we all imagine? In other words, what is different in a person who we all know, right? So both parties understand that this is only a 3-month contract versus somebody who has a permanent full-time contract. What's different? Does it cost the firm something to have a new hire come in? And not, beyond kind of showing, giving the office tour and teaching them how to use the copy machine. Is there training involved? Do they have to train you and teach you on the job? It's a huge investment, right? So we saw last week that, as a professional, especially for architects, right? So our professional organization, the AIA, includes this training aspect in their code of ethics, right? But it is an investment nonetheless. Do you think in terms of their kind of the firm operating budget, the salary that goes into paying your time, as well as the salary of other more experienced people who are spending time with you to teach you on the job, right? That kind of capital, the salary, do you think that takes up a significant amount of the overall, all the fees, all the income that they generate? Yeah, right? It's almost always the highest expenditure, right? So in other words, if somebody is looking to hire, fill a position, right, and they know that what that means is that they have to invest, right, then they want somebody who can do more than what a temp person can do, which is, know how to use Revit. So what are some things that, these kinds of positions, somebody who's willing to make the investment, what qualities, what strengths would they be looking for?
Being articulate.
Be articulate, yeah. Be articulate. What else?
Communication skills.
Know how to work in a team. Yes, very important. Sorry,
Communication skills.
Communication skills, absolutely critical. Even more so when you leave school. Right? What else?
Being professional.
Right, so be a professional in all the ways that we defined it: honesty, integrity, accountability, right? All of those kind of personal qualities. And what else? So, so we're supposing that, you're going into an architecture firm and you're going to be doing a lot of things that are similar but different in other kind of pace and scope and budget, but very similar tasks to what you do in design studio, right? So in design studio, if you had to kind of define a common denominator all the way from 110, right? So from 110 all the way to a thesis, right? The thing that all the faculty values above all else, what would that be? Great model? Beautiful drawings? Cool diagrams?
Being able to manage your time so you can perform different tasks, not just one.
Yeah, but what is the life of a project?
Professionalism.
Yeah, concept. Can you think conceptually and critically? Because if you can, right, if you can communicate to them and even better demonstrate to them that you know how to think critically, that you have an intelligence, this is something that you value, then it's worth it to me to train you. I can teach you the CAT skills, how to write business letters, how to talk to a client, right? That can all be taught. But critical thinking is a lot more difficult, right? So your ability to think conceptually, right? So try to imagine, so let's say that, two people started got the entry-level positions the same day, they all both started. One person has a strength in conceptual thinking, and the other person doesn't, right? And let's fast forward, 3 years, 5 years later, they're still at the same firm. The kinds of work that they'd be doing is different, right? And it doesn't mean that, this person, their specialty is now in, making competition entries, or this person is, moving towards project management, or it's regardless of those kinds of specific categories. Your critical thinking abilities and your conceptual thinking is at the root of all of those different branches, right? And so in your cover letter, in your resume, portray yourself, represent yourself in that mindset, right? So don't write it like you want a 3-month summer job and that's it. Write it like this is the starting point of your career, and that you understand that you are asking them to make an investment, right? A long-term investment.
Especially at this level, right? Because show that you can critically think, not just think, right? But also that you're able and willing to learn more.
Right.
And there's nothing more frustrating as a teacher or as a professional than wanting to teach somebody who's talented or is very skilled, but they think they know everything and are not willing to be taught.
Right.
It's just a waste. And so that's why I see this line, that really pops out to me. It's the last paragraph, so it's an important one. Hardworking, motivated, I understand that I have much to learn. So it's like, there's a sense of humility, there's a sense of modesty that's shown in the same sentence as saying, but I'm also pretty kick-ass. So there might be a good way of maybe wording that better too, saying I'm hardworking and I'm motivated to learn more in the field of architecture, but it puts it side by side, right? So you're not just showing at an entry-level position that I can do everything you want me to do, because they know you can't, but that you're willing to learn as they try to teach you.
Right.
I just want to pick up on, or second, one thing that you mentioned earlier too, in terms of writing and having other people read it. There's 4 things that I always tell people to do in history and theory classes that apply to this as well, I think. When you write something, you should always write more than what you print, because it does take a long time for it to come out of your head and into the paper, and it takes a while to wrap your head around what you're trying to say. So that means editing, right? You write 3 or 4 pages just to get it down to 1 page. So you should write more than what you print and what you submit. You should read it out loud so that you hear the words being spoken. That's the second one. You should have somebody else read it, maybe a friend in architecture. And then you should have somebody else read it that is not in architecture. I think that one is important. I used to send drafts of my papers to my mom sometimes. It's kind of embarrassing because she asks, she might not know some of the jargon, but if my main argument, if my main point is not clear to somebody that's not in architecture, it ain't good enough. It's not good enough. So those are the 4 things that I would advise you always do in any writing, but especially something like this. Write more than you print. Read it out loud, have somebody else read it, and have somebody else that's not in architecture read it.
So let's just do one quick example here. So what is crossed out here, so it's starting from the beginning of the sentence. I understand that I have much to learn in the field of architecture and hope that you will give me the opportunity to learn as much as I can from your office and mutually provide my passion and services. So that's 1 sentence. It's too long. I understand what they're trying to say, but it's not crisp, right? It's not eloquent enough.
So let's identify why. Why wouldn't it be as crisp as it could be? What do you all think?
Or some redundancies, like mentioning the field of architecture.
Good.
Yeah.
So redundancy is a key thing. That we do it all the time because we think we're making a point, but it's not a good thing to read. Redundancy can happen literally in terms or words or phrases appearing multiple times. It can also happen more abstractly, in that the same thing you're saying, even if it's in different words, appears in the same sentence. So there's both happening here probably. In 1 sentence, we're being told the person is passionate, hardworking, 3 or 4 times, as well as wanting to learn, wants the opportunity to learn. And so avoiding redundancy is important. So just the length of sentences, but also importantly, the cadence and the rhythm of sentences. I mean, this is a skill that I think is really underutilized. If you can mix in longer sentences with really short, abrupt, to the point, succinct, terse sentences, that makes a nice rhythm to read. So I've just come off a long one and then blah, 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 3 or 4 or 5 words. Maybe not 3, but a really short sentence. And it sets up a really nice rhythm, because there's nothing worse than reading a cover letter that has long sentence, long sentence, long sentence, long sentence, and you get exhausted.
Right, and the 7 seconds are up, they moved on, right? So what I got from that impression, so I didn't actually retain all of the information that the letter is trying to tell me, but what I took away is this person can't write clearly, or that, you know, they didn't spend the time to edit this or have it proofread, right? So just going back to the sentence real quick, so what the person is trying to say is that the person is humble, so the person acknowledges that, you know, he has certain sets of skills that to be productive from day one, but that he understands that there's a lot more to learn. But at the same time, because he is willing to offer his, you know, hardworking work ethics and the skills that he does know, the computer skills, that it'll be a benefit, right? So in other words, the firm it's not a complete loss to the firm, right? It's worth it for the firm to invest in this candidate. Right? So it's a mutually beneficial. That's what he's hoping for. That they're able to see something in his application that they want, an attitude, humbleness, you know, certain kind of basic skills, basic, you know, writing skills, right? And then so he's learning from them and he's benefiting their business, their firm, right? So he wants to contribute. That's the intent, right? But the sentence is using too many words. It's too redundant, and so that doesn't get communicated very clearly. Right? So I'm doing this as an example of the process that you have to go through in each of your cover letters and the resumes. Right? Okay. So use clear, direct, and concise language. So, or you can remember crisp. It has to be crisp, right? So concise. Nobody wants to read a long-winded letter in anything, right? We have too much information to process nowadays. Concise. And this is a great opportunity. So we talked about, you know, individual differentiation. So we all have the big categories of we went to this school, we did, you know, this extracurricular activity or this firm. We have these kind of big brackets, big categories. But you want them to get come away with, I understand the kind of person, or I understand the individual, the unique strengths that this person has over other people who are at the same school, right? So this, so the way you highlight those facts, what you choose to include, and the way you word it, it's all part of your persona that you create, right? So we talked about professional persona last week. So that continues in the way you present yourself in the resume and the cover letter, right? So strength and skills, right? So strength is beyond, I know how to use Revit, Rhino, and so forth. That's skills. So it's for entry-level jobs, it's important to list that, right? Because it's information they're looking for. But it should never be the first thing you say. It sends I believe that sends the wrong message. That you think that that's what they're looking for. And that you think that that's the best thing that you can offer to them.
Which one, the skills?
The computer skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know how to use Adobe Suite, you know, Rhino, 3D Max, you know, I'm very proficient, right? They are looking for that, but they want more than that, right? And we just talked about what that is. Right? So think of your strengths. These are not your computer skills. Think of your strengths as something that defines your career trajectory. Right? Resume format. So we'll look at a couple of examples. So in this one, so in broad categories, let's look at this more closely. So, right, it's a very common and acceptable experience. So in this one, it's a pretty good one. So right at the top, right? Look at the category. Look at what the category says. What does it say? Design and leadership. It says design and leadership experience. What does it tell you? It's the first thing on this first line of text on this page. What does it tell you about this candidate? Leadership. Yeah. So in other words, it tells us what's important to this person. Design is important to this person. Leadership skills are important to this person.
They've made leadership and design the same phrase.
Mm-hmm.
It's that you can't separate them for this person.
Yeah, right? In some ways, their values come across in the way that they structured this, in the way that they word the headings, the categories. right? And so then there's a list of, things to support that claim, right? And then the next category is work experience, right? So very common, so in reverse chronological order, right? It goes through the thing that you're currently doing, the latest or the most recent thing that you've done, and it goes to earlier and earlier. So in this instance, there are bullet points that describe the responsibilities. So in other words, it doesn't just say where the person worked or what their job title was. It actually describes what they did, the responsibilities, right? So this is where, so these bullet points, or the details, is where so the sequence of the information that you present, how you word it, and the detail, how you describe your experience is what you, so now just think of it as, this is how you tell them what you learned, right? How it improved or reinforced your strengths. This is where you have an opportunity to tailor this, right? Depending on what the position calls for, which firm you're applying to, right? So this is a pretty good one.
And when do you think about bullet points as opposed to, grammatically correct sentences? Is it okay to have bullet points here with active verbs starting the phrase?
So I personally tend to prefer those, but I think either can work. So I tend to prefer those because then I don't have to look for the end of one sentence and the beginning of the next piece of information. So I just go, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. So, for example, so the way it could be read, so I would read it. So I see the broad categories. I notice, so most people put, some like maybe their education at the top, or they start with the work experience. So they don't really give me a value, right? They just start listing their timeline in a way, right? So this person is beginning with design and leadership experience, right? So this tells me that to this person, this was really important. So outside of the schoolwork, outside of the jobs, right? This was really important. And then you look at work experience to say, okay, there's a couple of places. So at this moment in time, none of them happen to be in an architecture firm, so not within the profession. But he gives the person who supervised him, right, the name and the contact. So that already tells me that he maintains a good relationship, right? Enough that he feels comfortable giving them offering me their names and numbers, right, that I can check as a reference. And then he goes through, so they all start with the verb, right? So cater to the needs of customers, worked closely, and this one was a little clunky, but so in other words, this person learned fast and worked hard to rise fast, right? To have more responsibilities be given to them, right? Aided customers, and especially address customers' demands, created warm, comfortable environments. So because I've now kind of spent more than my 7 seconds to actually read the bullet point items, and they all started with the verb, right? I didn't even finish reading the rest. So what comes across to me is that this person values relationship building, and he exercised it in several of the jobs, where he was, right? And so I can, even though they are not within the profession, there's no architectural training that he received, he's going to bring with him these people building skills, the relationship building skills, right? And then the skills, the actual, the software, right? The CAD monkey skills at the end, right? So that's one example, and a pretty good one. And we'll look at so we'll look at this one. We'll go back to this one. So this one is interesting because it actually uses the margin, right? So by the way, because these two are they're two documents that go together, right? You usually submit a cover letter with the resume, so it's a suite of the same. So the format is similar. The format is unified. So in the margin of the resume, the detail is listed, right? So the skills. Not necessarily the qualitative strengths, but the things that this person can do, right? So there's already immediately a hierarchy of information, and the two are running parallel. So I know I can spend the time in looking through these, so experience and project history. So this person wants to tell me the kind of, the work experiences that the person went through, as well as the architectural projects, right? The projects within her studies, her architectural studies. And then the skills are listed here separately, right? In this one, it's more of a paragraph, right? So it's less of a bullet point. So what I see is that, okay, mentor student, so work for school, and then the server, and then project history, there's thesis and some other things. So this is somebody who, So also this one, so the date, so it tells me who stayed in one place of employment for a long time, 4 or 5 years, right? So that already speaks to me about a certain emotional maturity, that this person was able to hold down a job, for that long and maintain good relationships and good, professional relationships. As well as that this person was very active within the school, right? So while being a student, the person sought out different outlets for her strength, right? For her strengths to be a benefit to other students, right? In terms of tutors and mentors, right? So I would say, in my opinion, so this text is a little too long. So this is not something I would get in my first scan. I would have to come back to, if this makes the cut, then I would come back to spend a little bit more time to read this. Right? So if I were to make a comment on this, I would make it, and we can employ several. It can be bold text, or you can. So so as I mentioned, I prefer the bullet point because it's quick. It's a lot faster to absorb information and know what's important. But you can do other things, right? To highlight, right? Underline or bold key phrases or words, right? That describe what you did, not just where you worked. Right. So here are the first. Let's see. Yeah. Here are the 3 paragraphs, right? And so it begins with what they want, right? Why they're writing the letter. They want an internship position, right? And it lists what they learned, what they looked up about the firm. Right? What about their work spoke to them? Right? This is a reason why she's applying. Do you want to wordsmith this a little bit? Do you see any relevant examples that we could do as a group?
Let's all read through it and see if we
Okay.
can come up with things.
Okay.
Maybe write down some things that you think might be problems or things that are done well, just in your notes as we read through these 2 paragraphs.
So I'll read it out loud, since that's one of the things that you should do, right? I'm seeking an internship position with Gelfand Partners. I'm very intrigued by the firm's value-driven philosophy, and more specifically, the dedication to community the firm displays in its history with nonprofit organizations. I believe Gelfand's expertise and specificity in the field of architecture can provide an architecture student with an invaluable experience due to its process with community engagement and direct client interaction. These opportunities are specifically interesting to me, considering my current thesis project, which investigates the development of community and identity through small-scale interventions. Throughout my process, I've expressed a keen ability to convey my understanding of site and programmatic conditions by processing and organizing information and drawings. My critical thinking ability allows me to create alternative design solutions and conceptual ideas, which have always been a driving force behind my projects. My success in articulating these ideas graphically and verbally has helped me represent large amounts of research succinctly, optimizing the amount of feedback during presentations. These skills have also awarded me positions within the academic community. For the Academic Resource Center, I'm a peer mentor and a co-teacher for our liberal arts class, which focuses on successfully integrating students within the university community. I'm also the student representative on a faculty panel dedicated to improving student relationships with San Francisco industries. I believe working at Gelfand Partners would teach me how the process of engagement can directly affect the process of design, a fundamental skill essential to succeed in my thesis project and the maturation of an architect. And then signed. Right? So it's pretty good. It's articulate, right? I definitely get the sense of what she values, her values, and how she's trying to make the alignment between her values and the firm's values.
What are some of the things that stand out? Both in terms of content and form.
Well, you mentioned the cadence of the sentences
Okay.
earlier, so I made a note of that.
You made a note of that?
It's not in there.
Okay.
But they're all about the same length.
They're all about the same length. Are they all more on the shorter end or the longer end?
Longer.
There's our consensus.
Yeah.
So they're all a little bit on the longer end. Let's go back to the first paragraph. Yeah, so they could all be shortened up a little bit. I think that we see a little bit of redundancy in this last sentence in the first paragraph. I believe Gelfand's experience and specificity in the field of architecture. So they know they're an architecture firm, don't they? They don't have to be told that. Can provide an architecture student. I hope they know that you're an architecture student. So not only is architecture being used twice, but things that are obvious and don't need saying, really, with an invaluable experience. So maybe just pick up with what the experience can be, and that it'll be invaluable for the student. So that already that sentence is shrunk, right? And then in the next paragraph, its goals are very clear, I think. It's trying to say what the skill set is of the student. There's critical thinking, there's visual communication skills and graphic skills. Am I getting that right? Did I remember right? Yeah. But are they saying anything specific? Throughout my process, I've expressed a keen ability to convey my understanding of site and programmatic conditions by processing and organizing information and drawings. What architecture student wouldn't do that? So part of the role of the cover letter, I think, is to make yourself unique in some way. So it's important to show that you have these skills, but every now and then putting in a real specific, something that somebody can really put their teeth into, maybe even a specific moment from a project, like a really a concise example, makes it, you can grab onto it a lot easier and remember it a lot easier.
Right. So imagine how, the level and the quality of information that this paragraph would communicate if this broke away into saying, for example, for my thesis project where I researched X, I found a diverse range of information, and you kind of describe why it was difficult and unwieldy. And I chose a certain representation technique or, organizing principle to do, to present it why, right? And this helped me to make a design decision.
For students who may not be in thesis, even mentioning the program and the site that you are involved in that was really important to you, not just as information, but something that was really important to you, a program and a site, a user group, those kinds of specificity can spark connections with a potential employer because that kind of specificity can, with Gelfand as an example, something that overlaps with their practice that you're working on can spark a conversation that can start. So it doesn't have to be highly, it doesn't have to be research-based. It could be based on some experience that you've had that meant something to you, because you can see overlap. You never know what sites they're looking at. You never know what you may not know from their website what their current client list is, but if you know enough about them, by speaking to projects that you're really interested in school, you might be hitting an overlap place.
Right. So let's say that, so one of the building types that you want to gain more experience is in affordable housing, right? And then so you list your values, why that made you arrive at that decision, and you list your research about the firm who does affordable housing. So affordable housing is something you can't do without conviction because the profit margin is so much lower, right? So architects who are in who do affordable housing almost always has a really strong value set, right? So you list those, and then you reference your 450 project, right? And you may say, for this affordable housing for, the veteran population, I assessed the needs that this population has that the site lacked, and therefore me and my partners, another kind of footnote, always list the people who are responsible, give credit where it's due. So working with a partner within a team, we proposed, the blank program as an amenity to, kind of rethink all the program relationships within the complex, right?
I think the question in this case is, are you able to link the first paragraph to the second one in a very direct way? Because the first one's about the office, the second one is about the student or about the applicant, right? And so if you're specific with moments from your design experience here, you can then relate that right away back to what they do and what they do in their work, even a project, right?
Right.
Instead of saying specifically the dedication to community, the firm displays and its history with nonprofit organizations, you would know specifically a moment that represents that and be able to tie that to a specific moment in your own design.
Right. And you wouldn't have to
it helps a lot more if you've spoken to somebody at the office to mention that as well.
Right, right. And so I want to say, so then you don't have to use the word specific so many times. Because that's what you're trying to say, that you're not just randomly making a connection, that you feel that there's some really specific aspect about their practice and what you're interested in, but you're only relying on the use of the actual word specific, right? It shows up many times to try to communicate that, right? So provide actual data or information, right? More detail. That is evidence, not just your claim. Okay. So another thing to touch on is, so think about the context, right? So we're within a set of, within this context where we all know, we have a lot of information about how the structures are, the classes are structured, right? Because we all know the courses by their names, right? We know 110 means something to all of us, 450 means something to all of us. So there's a lot, so that's our own jargon. Nobody else outside of so the person who's receiving this has no idea, right? So that's one example, but think about other pieces of information, jargon that we use, right? That we're so used to using when we speak to each other that would be irrelevant to the person, to the audience, right? So a lot of work in the resume, a lot of work goes into what information is relevant, right? And how you decide that is what piece of information provides the most amount of context, the context that you want to define, right? Is it important to distinguish that it was a fourth-year design studio or not so much, right? Is it important to distinguish rather than whether it's a third year, fourth year, fifth year that it was a housing studio, right? So you don't have to list everything, all the pieces of detail like you would in an assignment, right? Do you want to do this?
So I think one way to look at this now is we can all break down together some things that we could easily do that are wrong or that are bad. We can have fun with this. We can be really analytical and really zoom into different parts to make sure we don't make these mistakes and actually make sure we capitalize on just the opposite. So I had my friend give me some of his information, a cover letter and a resume, and an email as well. My friend, I am incompetent.
Here, I'll blow this up.
So let's go to the top and work our way down. So what's my friend put at the top? We've got his name, I am incompetent. What's his email? So good or bad? I mean awesome, but not good or bad, right? Like not good.
For
right?
this audience.
Yeah,
right?
In a professional setting, you should have a professional email,
yeah.
right?
So we touched on this last week. I just want to point out this the data. So 76% of CVs are ignored if your email address is unprofessional, right? They're not even going to bother.
So likeaboss.com is maybe not the best. And then what's below that? What other information was essential for him to put up there? A hashtag. Archistar and Rising. Yeah, bold. Maybe don't put a hashtag up there in the first place, right? All right, so what's the salutation or the beginning, the address that's given? What do you think?
It's a little too casual.
Too casual on our spectrum? Probably. Right? We don't know the person already, so why would you start with hi?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go down and let's read this. Hi, my name is I am incompetent. Already do you think it's appropriate to put your name in the first sentence? One of our examples did that. What do you think? Is that a good way to use the first sentence?
Because you have 5 seconds, right, potentially. You're
How many
giving up, like,
times
2
is
seconds?
your name on that sheet?
Yeah.
It might be at the top. It's probably at the bottom as well. You want that first sentence to be pretty important. Okay, second sentence. I grew up in a really harsh climate of family and things. So there's a spelling error. Really? Not very good grammar. Okay. Times were tough, but thanks to myself, now things are good and I'm good at things. Come a long way from the harsh times. I'm looking for an architecture office that is successful and designs cool-looking buildings. There is so much I can offer, it's hard to fit it all on my resume. So what are some of the things that are bad, that are done wrong in just that paragraph? Specifically, really, because you'd be surprised with what you see.
Listing things that aren't relevant.
Listing things that aren't relevant, like what?
Like where he's from or how he grew up.
So this is a knee-jerk reaction, I think. A lot of students or beginning applicants feel the need to, like in a very condensed way, give their sort of biography. or their life history, because the person doesn't know it, right? And it's natural, because you're thinking to yourself, that person doesn't know everything that I've gone through and what makes me who I am today. So you try to fit it in. Don't do it. It's a pitfall, right? Nobody's going to want to read through that. That's not what they want to see. When we say strengths, it's not your biography, right? It's strengths that are going to help you help them. What else is bad about this paragraph?
Sentence fragments.
Sentence fragments, grammar, spelling. What about the last sentence of that paragraph?
Really bad excuse to not having any resume.
Pompous.
The content of the first paragraph is all about the person writing the letter rather than making any connection.
Me, 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 me. And I'm really good at everything. Does that show that that person is willing to be taught and develop? Not so much. They've already got everything they need. So let's look at the second paragraph. There was this one time in ARH 250 when other students saw my work and they were like, that looks like chewed gum. No, period. But I had the perseverance to stick to my guns, and I ended up passing. Basically, epitome. I don't listen to others who say stuff, and I keep my strong. What's wrong with this paragraph? Huh?
It's about them as well.
It's still all about them. What else?
He doesn't listen.
What about working with groups? Wow, right? Whatever anybody else says, I'm doing my own thing. That's not good. We just talked about this. ARH 250, who's going to know what that is? Even telling a story from something that happened in studio, right? Is that something you want to tell a future employer? Okay. No capitalized beginning of the word of the sentence. You can expect the same. I don't know what kind of buildings you usually do, but I can design lots of them. Group thinking. My complex networks and smooth surface doubly augmented conglomerate juxtapositions make me a unique candidate. So, what is this last sentence? Well, first of all, we've seen a couple like this. That's not a good short sentence, right? It's not even a complete one. What about this last sentence? What's wrong with that last sentence?
Just threw in long words for no reason.
Long words for no reason. Where does it fall on our spectrum? Pompous and too complex, right? All these architectural jargon words that only several people know, and the people that use them probably don't know what they mean either, that should not be used in a string of one sentence. And they end on that sentence. What's below that, Karen?
See the email.
The salutation. See the email above, and then name. So you don't just tell people where to look for things, right? That should be, what should be the salutation, you think, in a cover letter?
Sincerely, all the best.
Best regards.
Best regards, sincerely, kind regards.
Yeah, respectfully.
Okay. So we laugh, but all things to think about. And then what about our resume that I am incompetent sent in? So how about graphics? What font is that? What typeface? Papyrus?
Yeah.
Not good. In big red. So there's visual composition things that have to be done here.
Phone number is incomplete.
The phone number is a movie phone number and incomplete. The email. So what's important, what I think is interesting about this example is my friend Iam, he used a Word Perfect. He used a Microsoft Word template for a resume. Okay, so this is actually, if you just pulled a template off of Word, it might give you this same structure. So think about if that's really the best structure for what you're trying to convey. So there's an objective on this particular one. Do you usually put objectives on yours? That's a good point. Karen, do you like resumes that have an objective, a statement at the top?
It doesn't have to be, in this format and using the word objective. But the first piece, if the first piece of information at the top of the page explains the values, your values, what you hope to get by applying to this job and getting the position, right? And so we looked at a few different examples of the category wording that they use, what they choose to put on top, right? So don't just start listing the last thing you did, right? So let there be something that gives me an idea into what are the things that are important to you.
Yeah.
And beyond, good salary and good hours. Right?
What else about the structure of this? We can already tell in the experience. What's the top bold category? So what they did, and then what's the next thing that's not bold but in italic?
The business name?
Yeah, so that wasn't IAM's choice. That was in the template. So is that really what you want to convey? What's the top bold thing? Should that be the employer, or should that be your position? It's something you have to think about. I could actually see benefits to both, but I think it depends on what the person is looking for and what their experience is.
So, for example, if the employer is who's somebody outside of the profession, right, and what you got out of the experience is, it's not so much where you worked, but what you learned on the job, right? What you're able to now then bring to this office. Then it doesn't really matter if you worked at this retail store or that retail store, right? So it's much more important for me to know that what you did. Like, let's say you started as an entry-level person and you rose to become a store manager. Right? That information is relevant, even though it happened within a different discipline. Right? It doesn't matter it was at, Gap or whatever. It doesn't matter, right? So it depends on. But if it is within an architecture firm, I think it's important to put both. So I'd like to know if it's a firm that I recognize, because I might know somebody there and I could call them up. But as well as what you did. So like a job description, or job title.
So maybe we can move through this quickly. If you just scroll down, we can look at a few different things. What do we notice about the right-hand side and the dates?
They're not very specific. They're not chronological.
Okay, so they're not reverse chronological. They're not most recent first. What about their format? One says summer 2012, one says 2011 to, one says 2013 to the present.
That doesn't say present, that says
Present, misspelled. But it's not following the same format. It should always be following the same format. It should be from one part of the year to another, or whatever format, you need to be consistent. Right? They're not in most recent first. Some of them change their typeface in the middle of it. That happens, you'd be surprised.
For architects, no.
No,
right?
yeah,
Big
yeah.
no.
Graphic and visual people.
Yeah.
What else?
Because I don't want you to do that to me, right?
No.
To the reports that you're going to prepare under the company banner.
Sustainability is listed in every single employer, only it's spelled differently in every one. What about this kind of stuff? They use me for renderings lots. WTF, right? Smiley face. Again, the text speak, right? Too casual. And kind of information that's not needed. Should we go on to recommendations?
Yeah. All right, so reg letters. So did you all spend a little bit of time thinking about who you would ask? Your 3 letter writers? So can we share a couple of people, 2 or 3 people, why you chose these people? Benny? Did you select your letter writers?
And maybe not 3, but
okay.
There's kind of actually my landlord,
okay.
Which is an unusual one that I did. I mean, I've been living there for about 2 years, and she's dean at the CCSF Chinatown campus.
No kidding.
And we actually had she invited me out for dinner many times, so we kind of have a more personal relationship rather than just a straight kind of landlord-tenant relationship. And yeah, I mean, even internship opportunities kind of coming up casually, but yeah, so I think that she would be kind of one that I would look for.
So I would say 2 things. So one is, so even though it started out as a landlord-tenant relationship, it's evolving into, it is already something much more than that. And so on the one hand, so it sounds like you're already making the best, right? You realize this as an opportunity, right? So you're doing things to make her be more aware of the kinds of work that you like to do, the kinds of student that you are, the kinds of architecture that you're interested in, so that she can actually vouch for you when she writes the letter, right? Not that, well, Benny is a great tenant and we've had wonderful dinner conversations and so forth, right? So you want to be able to deliver, let yourself be more known to her, right? As well as kind of make sure that she understands, because in her letter, so she has to describe her relationship to you, right? And so it's better if she has something else to say other than, well, I'm the landlord, right? So try to kind of cultivate the relationship into a different, where you're using different labels, like a mentor. Like you could formally go up and ask her, would you be willing to be my mentor? Right? And then she can say, I've met Benny through a different context, but I've been mentoring Benny for the last 2 years. Right? Any other example? Blake? No?
Me?
Yeah, no?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I just have a previous employer, and then 2 teachers.
Okay. And what was your selection criteria?
Previous employer, because he's a practicing architect, an
Great.
internship there.
Great.
Reason for that is couldn't talk about my work experience in related fields, and then 2 professors that I thought I had a good rapport with, studio professors.
Great. Any other kind of ambiguous examples where it's not so? So those are all excellent reasons, right? Your previous employer within the field, and your instructors who on the one hand you have a good relationship with, but also who can vouch for the kinds of strength that you're putting on the resume and the cover letter, right? So in other words, they know you in that capacity, right? So those are great, perfect examples. Anybody else have something that falls outside of those categories? No? Dima? Do you have letter writers?
I think one of the, I actually went back to my past from like high school or something from like more than 4 years ago, just so it's a broader year spectrum almost. So I'm not sure who I would choose, but I have 2 people from my past that I'm still close with that dealt with me when I was younger on a professional job. Or not like professional, but like...
So your previous employers?
In a way, yeah.
In a way.
What about like colleagues or like people you work with on projects that aren't your boss?
So like you mean your peer? Like on a project in studio?
Yeah.
For example?
Well,
if
studio, but if, I mean, I don't have this as an example, but if you were working collaboratively with somebody else.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I would usually say no. Do you want somebody who has more tenure in the field than you, right? But if that letter is speaking to your collaborative experience with that person, and you have other letters to vouch for, your kind of integrity, honesty, and your strength, then yes. But usually your friends know.
Dimas brings up a good issue that comes up a lot of times, the statute of limitations one. What is too old to be relevant? How recent does the interaction with that person have to be for it to still be fresh? Because if an employer sees something, for example, if I went to somebody that I was working for in high school, it wouldn't bode very well for me. But that's a longer ago for me than you. So how long is too long?
So
and what kind of work was it at that time?
Right. So I think on the one hand, those kinds of reference would be excellent if this was a personal reference.
It is more personal, that's why.
But what you need and what you want to provide to your future prospective employer is a professional reference, right? So to include a personal reference because you felt that the letter is so strong and there's alignments between how they describe you as a person with the kinds of values you identify within architecture, great. But usually it's the professional recommendations, right? So you list things, right? Your strengths and your skills in your resume and your cover letter. I'm passionate about, what was your, the value-driven, architecture, a certain design process. So you want to pick a letter writer who can speak to that, the things that you list, right? Let's do another. Paris? Letter writers? I can't hear. Who did you pick?
Former employers.
Oh, okay. Former employers? School instructors. It's the same. Anybody? So nobody else has an ambiguous or question? No? Right.
Babysitters from when you were...
right? So again, those are good personal references if you're getting an apartment or something.
So what's the next step then? You have to communicate with them, right? You have to contact them.
When do you ask? When do you make this request? Can you please, write a recommendation letter for me?
A few months.
Yeah. So not, it's due this Friday, not, it's due in 2 weeks, right? You plan far in advance. Right?
The cost outweighs the benefit there, the risk and the reward. If you ask somebody for something that's due in a couple days, not only will you not get it, but you may as not bother to ask them for one again. It almost sours that relationship a little bit. See what I mean?
Right. And also
So it's
think about the
important.
quality of what they're able to produce in such a short time, right? It's going to be a form letter, right? How do you ask? So actually, I think we have this.
Oh, we have another one from Ian.
Your friend.
So he asked me for a reference once, a recommendation. And again, how does he start his email? There's no greeting, right? There's no address. Hello, Mr. Engel. Something like that. I didn't see you in the building today, so I'm emailing you. And then there's bold for no reason. This honestly, this isn't a joke as much. This honestly is not far off from requests I've received before. Engel, just my last name. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? I'm looking for jobs and lots of them ask for letters of recommendation. Redundant use of phrasing. I want to be able to interview soon, so if you could just send that to me by Friday, that would be perfect. I am incompetent. Yes, you are. So the tone is all wrong, right? It always comes down to who is your audience. This is supposedly a person that you're on friendly terms with, but they're also your superior. So again, it's much like the cover letter. You address them, you let them know of the need, probably where you're applying to, the kind of time span that you're dealing with, and you be very gracious that they have even thought about providing it for you.
Should this always be an email versus a phone call?
No, not necessarily. I would say this could happen in many different ways.
I would say it could happen both ways, but I would say, so I'll speak to the last item. So when you make this request, so think about, so we talked about building up your professional relationship and you leverage what you already have. So we have previous employers, instructors, mentors, right? So this is, it's a formal request. You're asking them to write a formal letter for an opportunity that you have a lot of stake in, right? So it's part of building that professional relationship, right? It's deepened. So when you make this formal request to the letter writer, you don't just, are they going to now do research on you and find out, what are your values, what kinds of projects did you do, what should I write in my letter? You provide that information to them, right? So in other words, with that request, you attach your resume, your cover letter, right? And if it's a graduate recommendation, your letter of intent, right? And your portfolio. So it's different. So in other words, so she was my instructor, so she knows what kind of a person I am, and she knows the kinds of work that I do and my values, right? Well, that person can only speak to that class, right? Because you are able to, so you're able to deliver a lot more information about you professionally, about the kinds of things that are professionally important to you, if you give them the whole package. So now the person can reference, so they can identify what your values are. They can speak to that, right, if they're in the position to, right? And they can cite specific examples in your portfolio, right, to kind of vouch for the strength that you're trying to claim that you have.
I received an email about 10 days ago from a previous student when I was teaching in London, and they said, "Hi, Mr. Engel, I don't know if you remember me, but," that's not a good sign, right? "I don't know if you remember me, but I had you in a history and theory class, and I wrote an essay entitled," and it was a very good essay or something, "and I'm applying to graduate schools. Could you write me a letter of recommendation?" So I had the student in one course. There was one essay of hers that I graded, and it was in 2010. I actually remember the essay, is the funny thing, but I don't know. I don't have a wide enough area to pull from in terms of what that student is capable of doing in graduate school in general. I had one maybe 2,000-word essay. So I had to tell the student, I would love to, but I'm sorry, that was a long time ago. It was one class. I can't do this for you. And she understood. It's just an example, though. You'd be surprised.
Right. So if you're ever in a position like that where, you know, it's for a very specific position and, you know, this person who would be a really good letter writer that can speak to that aspect of you, like you haven't done a good job of keeping in touch, right? So you can still reach out, because in most cases, if it's an instructor especially, if it's, you know, professor, they'll remember you, but, you know, help them, give them context, you know, and even like open the email with, I really appreciated, you know, what I learned blank in your class, you know, blank at this institution blank, right? And you explain your circumstances, and then you attach, and here's some examples, you know, samples of what I've done since. And even better, you know, and all of that or some of that was fueled by or inspired by what I, you know, learned from you, right? So there are ways to do this, to reestablish the connections, right?
So we should wrap up soon.
Yes.
We have the firm list?
Yes.
Right.
So did we all kind of, how was the firm search, the list, how did the search go? Were you successful in finding on the AIA website the firm list as well as the job board? So the firm list is just a list of all the firms that are in the city, and the job board are, you know, where the firms post openings, job openings. Did everybody find that? Okay. So where to apply? So we touched on this, right? So you align your values with their values, right? So we'll talk a little bit about, so looking for a job is a full-time job. So let's say that, you know, this is entry-level job, you know, I mentioned this last week, it's extremely difficult because you're asking that firm to take a huge risk. It's a big investment, it's a big risk, right? So nobody wants to, it's very few that you find an entry-level job. The openings are very few. So you have to apply to more places, right? So you have to apply to, you know, more and hope that one of them or two of them will offer you a position, right? So now let's say you apply to 10 places, right? And so for each one, you're tailoring your resume, your cover letter. You've done the research for all 10 of them, right? So for each one, if you wanted to count, if you want to hear back from them, right? I mean, it's a throwaway, don't bother sending it. But if you want to hear back from them, you're doing research, you're tailor your resume and your cover letter. And then at the end of your cover letter, you say, you know, so you list evidence, you know, attached, please see my portfolio, specifically look at, you know, this project on page whatever, you know, where my values that are important to me are, you know, exhibited, right? And then say, you know, I will follow up with a phone call or email. So some firms are very particular about how you should follow up. Most places don't want you to call, right? So find out first. Say, I will follow up with an email a week from now, whatever, right? That's how you close. So now you have to follow up, right? And now you have to remember, you know, did they not mind a phone call? Did they say email was the only format that would be acceptable? You have to keep track. So now you have to get organized, right? So you have to make a record, you know, in a spreadsheet of the places that you are applying, what you sent to them, right? When you sent it to them, you know, what is their preferred or prescribed mode of communication is, and whether or not you followed up.
Yeah, the Excel spreadsheet, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really be able to coordinate all this. It's easy to forget it if you don't write it down or have it in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, you won't remember. Right, so in other words, this is another indication, right, where this is another opportunity for you to prove to them that you have the organization skills and the tools to manage your affairs, right, of you know, fulfilling your promise. So just very quickly, this is a slideshow by a marketing person at a marketing company who does hires. So this is an excerpt. We'll look into a little bit more. A lot of the content applies to next week's content. So he says there are 11 reasons why this person will never hire this, right? One is your resume is longer than that of a 25-year professional, right? So don't be pretentious. Edit it, concise, crisp. You didn't look at my website, right? Meaning you didn't do research. So for them, the social media presence is a big thing. So she's always listed that. But then the last one, you didn't. So this is in the context of now having been granted an opportunity to job interview with them, right? And we'll talk about that more in 2 weeks. Making eye contact, learn to hold conversation, give thoughtful answers to difficult questions. Right? You didn't proofread, right? So this ties back to what we talked about today. If you can't eliminate bad grammar, then how can I expect you to write an error-free report for a client? Right, so that this is the bar that they judge you against, right? And then there's, in addition to the PDF file of the reading about how architects write, there's also this as a resource. So that's the link. So this person goes through, these are the 10 things that they list, right? Kind of the criteria, the process that this person is describing in the job search, right? So a lot of it aligns with what we've been talking about, right? How we've been building up. So build a supportive network, define your purpose, form a selection criteria. Yeah, how do you connect your values to how you choose? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Make an impression. So towards the end, this goes through the whole process of identifying where you would apply, how you present yourself, interviewing, following up, getting the job, starting the job, making the decision. So towards the end, know when to quit your job. Right. So the PDF articles, files, as well as the PowerPoints will be made available to you as a resource. So this will be included as well in that.